Welcome to Brad Dacus Live. We have a lot to talk about today, including a story about a teacher that was fired because she used the wrong pronoun. Also, there's a story about a professor who decided to exclude and dismiss all students who were pro-life or had any kind of criticism of BLM. We're going to talk about these and other cases on today's program. And to help me talk about these cases, we have with us here a guest, Professor Myron Steeves from Trinity Law School.
Good to be here.
Glad to have you on the program. I know actually we at Pacific Justice Institute have an office at Trinity Law School, and one of our attorneys, Michael Peffer, who also often guest hosts, he heads up that office.
Yeah, and he's an alum of the law school.
And he's an alum of the law school. He actually went to law school there.
Yeah.
So good job.
Thank you.
Now, Myron, before we get into a lot of these cases and issues, I want to first just talk about what we're seeing happening on a local level. We see many states, in most states across the country, contrary to the MSNBC and some of the liberal media, the reality is the cases are going down. The number of new cases every week is decreasing and decreasing when it comes to the COVID-19, the coronavirus. And we're seeing that happening also in states like places in California. Well, what's the good news with regards to Orange County, California? I think people are going to be happy to hear this as they are looking, hopefully, for their counties to be in a similar situation.
Yeah, California has a complicated formula, and they've got 5 standards. And if you meet those standards for 3 consecutive days, you're off the monitoring list, and that opens things up more.
Like?
Well, San Diego County got off the list last week, the first Southern California county, and Orange County hit these benchmarks yesterday. So it's possible things could open up more, which would mean more eating indoors, possibly, for restaurants. And a big thing for us at our law school is we are not allowed to lecture indoors as long as Orange County was on the monitoring list. And classes begin next Monday. We're just a 5-day break away from starting classes. And we are actually prepared to offer lectures outside at the law school just because students are anxious to be on campus.
Right.
And it's possible that come Monday morning, we'll be back inside.
Well, that would be nice, especially considering the heat wave that we're dealing with here in the West. So, well, I'm glad to hear that. One thing that I think is important for people to take note of is that, we at Pacific Justice Institute watch and monitor very closely what the governor's allowing, the health department's allowing as far as reopenings. Because my big gripe has been when they allow, institutions to open, say like a classrooms to open, where kids are meeting there in a fixed place, a defined place, not just 1 hour, 1.5 hours, but like for 6, 7, 7.5 hours a day. They're sitting there in their seats, going in the hall 5 days a week. And they're being allowed to do that. But some of these same governmental entities in some of these states are treating churches differently, saying, oh, but you want to meet for 1.5 hours for a church service?
Yeah.
Oh, we're not going to allow that. You're a different category, So when we see that happening, I can assure you we at Pacific Justice will be jumping on that. And if there's someone out there, you have a church and you're in a city or a community where you see that double standard taking place, contact us immediately so we can represent you and your institution or your church or your private Christian school. So we're hopeful that we're going to see more private Christian schools also opening up as well in the near future.
Yeah.
We're helping them actually one at a time based on their certain situations. Let me ask you about a broader concept.
Sure.
Myron. People often think of the law as boring, something that has no spiritual dimension. In fact, there's some churches and pastors who even look at the law and politics and statutes as being just totally worldly, non-spiritual. They ignore it. They don't even mention and encourage their members to register to vote or much less to vote. Why should Christians care about the law?
Well, the law is a great area in which the church and Christians specifically can express themselves and have a part in bringing all the corners of the earth into God's kingdom. While each of us naturally has some sense of justice, Christians have a very thorough, comprehensive sense of what is just. And while I'll admit reading a statute is kind of boring, the law itself, taken all together, is a marvelous thing. Law is about all aspects of life, and it reflects our values. It's a teacher. Sometimes it's a horrible teacher, but it does teach us things. And can I give you one example of a beautiful aspect of law? Baseball arbitration is a means that takes into account our fallen nature and our internal sense of justice. Usually you think of arbitration as two sides kind of duke it out, and then a neutral makes a final decision. In baseball arbitration, when it's about a player's salary, both sides have to put in one number that they think is fair. And the arbitrator has to pick one of those two numbers.
Really?
So in normal nature, you always lowball if you're the one that's got to pay. You highball if you're one that wants money. You're not looking for fair. You're looking to advocate. The problem that you face as a party in baseball arbitration is you have to concede the best you can do that's fair because you want the arbitrator to pick your side. That one principle is so beautiful in how it captures human nature. It appeals to both your instinct of greed, part of your fallen nature, but it also appeals to your sense of justice because you and the other side both have to unite in finding fairness. It's a marvelous thing. And the law is full of things like that.
Yeah.
Contract law on how we engage in interactions with each other is all about what is human nature like when we make promises to each other. And our faith feeds into this all over the place. It's a marvelous thing.
Now, we talked earlier about a more serious context, the role of law in terms of America and America's future. Specifically, you mentioned to me how you feel America may be on the verge of collapsing. And explain that, because I think it was very insightful and to show the seriousness of where we are and how close we are to the edge of the cliff as a nation and a future for our posterity.
You remember John Adams making the comment about our system of government requiring a religious people to carry it out.
Right.
I think he is correct. And we are seeing some really shocking things now that come from a nation that's lost its moorings in its Christian foundation. And an aspect of that is our system of government only works if elected officials are accountable to the people they vote for. They've always got to be looking to think, are the elected, are the voters going to support what I do? And they've always got to be worried, if I make the wrong call, I'm out of office.
Right.
When you have a situation where there's violence in a city and elected officials can say, I'm going to cut the budget of the police in response, they have no fear of their electorate, because that seems by its nature to be
let's talk about that. Like Seattle, Portland, New York, Chicago. I mean, there's not just one city. These are major cities across the country with liberal, far leftist politicians on the city council, the mayors dominating these cities where all these riots are taking place. It's baffling, I think, to mainstream America. We ask the question, okay, why don't the people in Seattle hold them accountable? Why don't they get in a mob and say, we're going to boot you out of office because you're not protecting us? And instead, it's like they're either silent or they're part of the mob or the rioting.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to understand logically, if I would lived in Seattle, I would want my town to be stable just for my own safety, for the safety of my business or my job. What's going on in the psyche?
It's a very serious breakdown. One thing that has not changed is there's always going to be an element of a population that's going to be anti-establishment. We've always had prisons. We've always had crime. But politicians on left or right recognize the bottom line, safety in the area that I'm in charge of is critically important. If I can't maintain that, I'm out of office. And that's not true this year. Regardless of what the politicians actually do, it is shocking that a politician can actually say, there's violence in my city, I'm going to reduce the police force, and simultaneously bump up private security for myself, and not have that reverberate in the public and say, whether you're on the left or right, you got to provide police protection so that I don't lose property and home. And right now, politicians know they don't have to promise safety, and there's no cost to them. That suggests a breakdown in the system, because if they're not accountable to the rational thoughts of their electorate, that's very disturbing.
Yeah, I see it as a spiritual dimension of this.
I do too.
Because it's illogical. As an attorney,
Yeah.
we're looking at logically. We want safety in our community. Politicians don't provide safety. They limit law enforcement to provide safety. We'll boot them out of office. Radicals saying police are bad. They're doing bad things. Well, we look at the facts. Look at the statistics from the FBI last year. Of the 10 million arrests that happened, only 1,004 were fatalities, police fatalities, killing people. Of those 1,004, only 41 of them were unarmed. Those 41 were still committing crimes. Some of them were trying to get the guns from the officers. And of those 41, only 9 were African American.
Yeah.
And yet 89 police officers last year were killed, lost their job. So it's illogical, completely illogical for people to be engaging in massive rioting and even peaceful demonstrations for that matter, when the stats and the reality show something very different, that actually law enforcement is doing a good job providing law and order, particularly for these high crime communities, particularly in the urban black communities of our country.
Yeah. There is a spiritual explanation for it, in that we don't often think about this because we're raised in a system that has a justice system and we take it for granted. We don't think about it. But when you do something wrong, you're punished. There's 3 ways the state punishes you. It's loss of life, liberty, or property. And nobody wants to lose their life, liberty, or property. How dare the state come in and say, you can no longer be free, you're going to be in a prison cell? Well, the reason is we have a strong sense of morality, and say that if you do something that is objectively, morally wrong, the state is doing good by exercising punishment. Our society is developed so that morality seems awkward when you talk about it in the public society. We don't talk about whether a law is morally good or not. It's left our discourse, and it's hurting us. And in 2020, it's becoming really apparent that that's the case.
So as our society becomes more amoral, whereas if it feels good, do it. If you can rationalize it, it's okay.
Yeah.
There is no truth beyond what you feel. You're your own truth. You're your own God. As that mindset, which is exactly what our students are learning overwhelmingly at universities, even a lot of, quote, Christian universities across our country and public schools, as that permeates and as that dominates, then there's less respect for the law, and there's seemingly more justification, because these people they're doing what they feel is right. Who am I to say differently? And our laws are not enforced and they're not respected. Is that sort of what
Yeah, and I think the process is very, very slow. In the academic world, you can see the fracture starting 150 years ago. But as long as it was just egghead professors at universities, nobody paid much attention, because that's not where voting power was. But we have seen in our lifetimes, children are raised from the youngest grades to have these values that power is meaningful without any moral justification. And they don't have the vocabulary to talk about what is morally good and what is morally bad in governance.
Right. And so we have the rioting, we have the confusion, we have the breaking down of cities. One good piece of news is that we still have communities in the overwhelming majority of America, particularly in the suburbs, small towns, where people do have the consensus is one of morality, respect for law and order, justice, and they're not willing to surrender that, at least not yet. Hopefully, I'm hoping that our society and our nation will learn and say, look, it says, they'll say, like, instead of saying, remember the Alamo, they'll say, remember Portland, remember Seattle, remember New York,
Yeah.
remember Chicago, remember Detroit. And they'll say, you're right. We need to support law enforcement. It's illogical for us to have high crime and want to defund the
Yeah.
police. And then they'll learn from it. What do you think? Is that,
Yeah.
am I dreaming there? Or?
No, you're right. And it was predictable that the problems would be the most massive in big cities and in big states, less so in smaller towns and smaller states because the elected officials are closer to the people and they can't fully escape that.
Right.
When you know the mayor of your town, you can go knock on his door and say, "What do you mean you're cutting down the police department?" And,
Right.
there are consequences.
Now, I know on a national level, if this mindset was to dominate on a national level, it could consume this country. And the reason I mention that specifically is because we do have an election coming up. And there is an organization called the Minnesota Freedom Fund. And their purpose is to take money and criminals who are arrested, not even looking at what they're arrested for, but to pay their bail, to get them out on the streets, to get them out of jail, get them on the
Yeah.
streets. One of them was a murderer. It was asked, "Did you not check it out first?" They said, "We don't check out. We don't care. We just want them not. We think it's wrong for anyone to have to pay bail to be behind bars. We're letting all criminals out on the street. So
Yeah.
we're gonna do the bail. We're gonna get them out on the street." That's what I heard was reported. This sounds shocking, but here's the real kick. As it turns out, it's reported that Joe Biden's staff have paid money into the Minnesota Freedom Fund to fund the release of criminals, some of whom have reportedly engaged in further hideous crimes against innocent victims.
Yeah.
It's also been reported that Kamala Harris, the VP nominee, has also contributed money to the Minnesota Freedom Fund. If that mindset occupies the White House or the Senate, because there's some senators who are beholden to that too, apparently, we could see a Portland potentially on a national level. That's my concern. What say you?
Yeah. I agree with you that would happen if it's nationalized. I have a feeling that they would back off of that if elected. I think these are,
You think they would?
yeah, I think they are appealing to a voter base. I mean, Kamala Harris was the Attorney
Criminals.
General. So there are plenty of speeches of her taking a law and order position, not that long ago.
Yeah, I know. So
And-
you're thinking it's just a political thing going back and forth. She also, though, withheld evidence in someone on death row, and she was not providing it. And had that evidence been provided, and in fact it was provided because the court ordered her to provide it, and when it was, they realized that this person was not guilty
Yeah.
and was taken off death row. There was also a time when she was tough on crime, like 1,500 she had prosecuted for marijuana, and then when asked, "Have you ever smoked marijuana?" she just laughed and acknowledged, yeah, she
Yeah.
has. So whether she's really truly respectful of the law or committed to posturing herself for re-election,
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know who she is when I look at all the things that she's
Well,
different positions.
Yeah, this goes back to the morality and faith thing we were talking about earlier, is that Christians, by nature of the fact that they've got their eyes on the horizon looking to God, have more of a tendency to see the big picture in these situations. And when you can talk freely about morality of the law, you realize the whole reason why we have this apparatus of trials and prisons and judgment is to have a safe society. The purpose of law is to encourage virtue and suppress vice. If you've lost that, you fixate on minutia. And if you care more about how sad it is that a poor defendant can't afford bail than the thought that defendant, there's clear evidence she committed murder, rationally you would think the highest value here morally is the outrage of murder, not the fact that bail's really expensive for some people.
Yeah, it's a
It's
twisted.
lost of the big picture.
It sort of reminds me of Romans 1:8. For just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God
Yeah.
gave them over to a depraved mind that they might do that which is not proper.
Yeah,
And I think it's God's grace that we have a conscience. It's by God's grace that we see the laws of nature and nature's God and the understandings of justice. And we turn against God. We throw out that grace, I think, to some degree. I think
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing there. And I'm concerned because we see, like, for example, Kamala Harris in the debate. She condemned Biden, called him a racist, just
Yeah.
a blatant racist. And now she says he is a man who's going to fight against racism. He's a wonderful man. He's not a racist. Da, da. And she was asked, well, why did you say this in the debate? And she goes, that's politics.
Yeah.
It's just a debate. That's just the way it goes. So when are you telling the truth? I mean, when that is the question that we have to ask someone seeking high office, it's pretty logical that we should be concerned. Obviously, there's some people, there's some candidates that are very sometimes obnoxious and very very blunt and very uncouth in how they pronounce things. There's one allegedly occupying the White House that has those accusations, should I say,
Yeah.
if not verified accusations. That's one thing, to lack style or to lack finesse or to lack that demeanor, if
Yeah.
you will. It's another thing to have someone elected who does not have a foundation of any kind of morals or integrity.
yeah.
Uh,
I was surprised when hearing Kamala Harris's explanation of the inconsistency. And for one thing, it's acknowledging an inconsistency, but she's treating it like it was a debate club in college, where you're told to flip sides and argue the other position, because that's a skill. But the reason why we spend an extraordinary amount of money having debates among candidates is not to see who is the most talented debater. We are hoping that we are seeing actual positions there.
Right.
And it's an odd concession that that's not what the debate is about, that this
Yeah.
is really kind of an entertainment moment, and you get to see
yeah,
the personality of a future candidate.
yeah,
And it's a sad world when we're electing people based upon their charm and ability to drag down their opponents, rather than what their policies are and whether they can explain away the weaknesses in their viewpoints. It's an odd moment.
it is.
Although I think we've been coming down this path since TV was invented. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, but they're not running for America's national debater. They're running
Yeah.
for president of the United States to govern, or
And-
vice president of the United States, which will likely be, according to polls,
Yeah.
she will probably, if Joe Biden's elected, she will likely be president of the United States before his first term's over. According to almost 6 out of 10 Americans believe that.
Yeah.
So we've got some serious concerns moving forward, and I think that, and then also when it comes to religious freedom, we have a lot on the line. I've never seen religious freedom under attack more than it is today, right now, with churches and pastors being told they can't meet. When you have other entities, Home Depot and pot shops and liquor stores and others, no problem. They can meet, they can gather, they can do their thing. But we've seen a double standard. And real quick, John MacArthur,
Yeah.
Dr. John MacArthur, pastor of Grace Community Church, written many books, served his community, and not a radical. He's the opposite of any kind of a radical kind of a person, but he just says enough is enough. We need to get back to congregating together. We've given you not weeks, we've given you months. And our nation is paying a price in terms of increased suicides and depression and all kinds of problems. There's a need here. And so now I understand, what was the latest? I understand that he was told by a judge, temporary restraining order, you can't meet at church. Then he was told by another judge that you could.
Yeah.
And then the appellate court just came down with a decision saying,
That the decision goes for the state and not for Grace Church.
Yeah.
I was actually, California being California, I was surprised that he got the victory at the trial level. I think it was the right call there, but it didn't surprise me that was overturned.
right, so you think it was the right call that the church should be allowed to meet and open.
But
But you were, and And now it's been overturned by the appellate court. You're not surprised because it is still California appellate courts are very liberal.
I actually, less than a lot of people who get involved in conversations about the COVID-19 crisis, I actually cut a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle some slack on facing an issue that we couldn't anticipate. You know, it's really hard to know how to act. But you see patterns when you look across the country at many politicians responding to many issues. There is undeniably an attitude towards religious life that it is not terribly important. It is more like entertainment than it is like a central core purpose of being human.
Right, and I think we've seen that particularly in blue states. It's no accident that states that have Democrat governors have been overall the most hostile in how they treat churches versus other entities, other institutions, whether it's stores, restaurants, etc. We see a double standard. We're litigating that, in fact, in a number of states. And yet you have red states with Republican governors, and they seem to be saying, whoa, churches are essential. They're not non-essential. We're not going to put them in the back of the bus and let them be the last one off. Churches are essential. And those states have allowed churches to open up sooner and have dealt with, and actually are dealing with better economics and better health and safety, at least at the same level as the blue states, if not better.
Yeah, and this is a sign of something where our culture has changed. And it's happened so slowly that we haven't really paid much attention. But there was a time when everybody thought religion was important, even if they weren't themselves religious. They were happy to be around religious people. And now we have an era where there's a large part of our population under the age of 40 that has never been inside a church. They actually have no idea what really goes on in there. And they don't see the importance of people being reconciled to their Creator.
Right.
And they view churches as being some kind of community association. They don't see it as important. And that's a tragic loss. I don't know that a society can survive if it has no kind of belief standard that is a measuring rod for what is good and what is bad. I think we are there.
Well, what happens, as I understand it, and our founding fathers pointed this out, that, like you mentioned, we can't have freedom and liberty without faith and morality.
Yeah.
And because the less moral we are, the less faith we have, the less moral we are, and therefore we're more reliant on the state and government coming in, infringing on our freedoms to maintain law and order. And that's the sad thing. The more independently moral and responsible we are as individuals, not relying on the government to keep us in line, the more freedom we can have as a society. And we've seen that the World Bank Organization, which is not my favorite organization, did an analysis on World Bank on why are some countries prosperous and other countries not. And there were two major reasons they found, two major factors above all the others. One was whether or not the government has a system of justice, of laws that treat everyone equally and fairly under the law, so that people can invest in that company and businesses knowing they're going to get a fair shake. They can go, before a judge.
Yeah.
The other is the extent to which people in that country are individually and personally moral, and don't just simply do what they can get away with without being caught, but do what they do because they know it's right or wrong.
Yeah, in a democratic representative form of government, that second point is particularly true in an interesting way. Every elected official, at some point after they've been in office for a while, realizes that professionally, there's no downside to overpromising and under-delivering. The only reason why they wouldn't follow that baser instinct is their integrity means something to them. And if you have no belief in any moral system, you'd say, I've got to get over this guilt thing. It's hard on the career. But if you have faith in God and believe that there is a moral standard, integrity means something, where you could say, I must take a stand on this issue, even though it's going to be a political career killer. And today, we don't have as much of that.
Yeah, you're right. And we've seen that manifest itself, and we're going to talk in the second part of this program how that attitude and philosophy is manifesting itself in our schools and in our universities. We return right after this.
Parents across the state are keeping their kids home from school today. They say the new sex ed program is too inappropriate, adding the curriculum sexualizes children as young as kindergarten age.
They were protesting new guidelines for sex education in public schools.
They're concerned that a new sex education curriculum goes too far and takes away their parental rights.
If it's in California, I know many other states are doing it as well. This is not far behind. It's going to be everywhere.
We at Pacific Justice Institute have been fighting this for quite some time, but never at the degree and the level that we're dealing with it right now.
That I didn't think was quite necessary for 10-year-old kids.
If parents knew what was happening, I think they'd be very, very alarmed.
The California Healthy Youth Act now requires that school districts cover topics like gender identity, gender expression, and abortion.
For fifth graders.
It's not age appropriate, it's not medically accurate, it goes way beyond the law.
If it feels good, do it.
This is for fifth grade as well. This is still in the framework. This is for third grade. And only they, meaning 6-year-olds, know what they are.
It's in government, it's in our medical societies, it's activists promoting this.
And they all said this is inappropriate. Children cannot process this information. It's harmful.
Whatever they're doing is not working.
This isn't the way that I would want my own children taught about something as important as this in their life.
So the California Department of Education still believes these books are appropriate. And these are the people that are making decisions over our children's education.
This is one of these battles in life where you drop absolutely everything and you go to the hills, because this is the hill I die on.
You can't teach this in an unbiased way. It's a moral topic.
When we tell parents, they're livid, they're angry, because they want to protect their children.
We will stop at nothing to protect our kids.
Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged, don't be intimidated.
Parents have to be vigilant, they have to be insistent.
All you have to do is start educating yourself.
The districts and the staffers are very good at misleading parents.
Without question, there is a growing movement of parents across the country who are speaking out and objecting to what's taking place. It doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you've got children, you're going to care. Welcome back to Brad Dacus Live. I'm here with Myron Steeves. And Myron, we have a question regarding an Idaho judge. This judge decided to block the enforcement of a new law in Idaho, which says that someone who's transgender, let's say a biological male, cannot compete in sports events that are female, like say he's a male wrestler.
Yeah.
He cannot compete in a female wrestling competition. They're going to define individuals' gender based on their biological form, makeup, not on the mental condition, the gender identity dysphoria that they may happen to have at the time, which sometimes they have comes and goes, So that was the law. That's what the judge did. Why was this a surprise for a number of people, that the judge would block this Idaho law, which seems on its face to be very just and fair?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we're used to the court steamrolling over common sense, that this came as kind of a surprise from that standpoint. I think that issue, men competing in female sports, is the wedge issue that makes the transgender movement fall apart. Is people know in their core there's just something wrong about that. We have long had male and female sports separate for very obvious reasons, and this is saying that that's irrelevant. And this is the one issue that I think those who are otherwise sympathetic to that side just say, I want my daughter, who is a great athlete, to win because she is the best girl out there in competition.
Well, what if they come back and say, well, why not have males competing with females? Aren't we all really all the same anyway? Why should this be a big deal? Why do we have the Civil Rights Act amended to have sports for females. I mean,
well, you know, there's a pattern there. We were talking about this at the faculty meeting at the school just a couple of days ago, that there are some subjects that are off limits on your being whoever you want to be. You know, you can declare yourself your own sex, you can declare yourself your own race, but age is off limits. You can't go around just saying, I'm 21, I feel 21, and I want you to treat me like I'm 21. Everybody knows that if we took that seriously, the world would fall apart. You know, you'd have 10-year-olds driving cars, you'd have 16-year-olds drinking, you'd have 40-year-olds saying, I want my Social Security check now. We know that you can't fake it on age. Why is it that we can do it on sex? And somehow the irrationality of it breaks down. It becomes, you know, whichever group is politically capable of advancing their agenda. And to a great part of the population, I think to its discredit, they ignore any difference between the sexes. But when you get to female sports, it's just too absurd to ignore that. And most people, even that are strongly progressive, will have to acknowledge that it's just, that doesn't work.
I know our society coming out of the equal rights movement of the 70s, we're just obsessed with equality, that not just equality of dignity and respect, but also equality of function. And they would say, well, everyone, we're all the same. I remember my law professor in law school, he said, the only difference, you know, between men and women is one has interior plumbing, one has exterior plumbing. He said, that's the only difference. All the students just laughed. And I just shook my head and I thought, really? Is that really what you honestly think? And I talked with some of the women from the feminist club.
Yeah.
And I said, do you guys actually believe that? Do you believe that the brain of a male is the same as the brain of a female? They said, yes, it's exactly the same. And I said, okay, mark my words. The day will come when you will see on the cover of Time magazine or Newsweek a whole expose on how brains of men and women are different. I said, we're not seeing it now, but we will. About 15 years later, cover of Time magazine, they were the ones that came out with it, how the brains are distinctively different in terms of gray matter, in terms of size, in terms of white matter composition, function, etc. So it seems like we're able to understand that to some degree, that there is differences and strengths, but there for both. But it seems illogical that we can't understand the inherent genetic advantages that males have in terms of bone structure, in terms of muscle structure, and you know, even the just the format. I mean, the testosterone levels, hormone levels. Even if a male has shots to decrease his testosterone levels, he still has the advantage in the formation of having a male body and a male muscle. And
well, every equal rights argument has as its foundation, my issue is just like race. And everything that you said is true in race. So there's no difference in races on capacity and capability of doing everything. That is a neutral issue on humanity. So for every other issue, you've got to make a comparison to race, and it just doesn't always hold. Most obvious difference between gender and race is women give birth, men don't. And that's unavoidable. And the workaround in recent years is to say, oh no, that's not true. You're just too rigid in your definition of male and female. And of course, some men get pregnant and some women can't, because the plumbing isn't the way that you think it is. You choose your own plumbing, or you choose your own description for the plumbing. And you can get away with that up to a point. It's all really funny at some point to say, oh, I identify as something different from what I am. But there comes a point where it just gets so absurd that people say life is a meaner place if we follow that argument. And one area that most people, very few exceptions, would agree on is that if women's sports has men in it, everyone will say, I don't know if I can articulate why, but that's just stupid.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I don't watch this show very often, South Park, because I don't like the language. But I did noticed it was to have one of their shows was a story about a very liberal family, and their daughter was a wrestler, and she was going in competition with a biological male, and they made the cartoon. The guy was like this big, super muscle guy, low voice. I'm gonna kill her, and the parents were trying to be PC throughout the show, and then at the end of it, he just explodes and says, "This is crazy. This is ridiculous. This isn't right. It's not fair. It's not just." Like the laws of nature come back.
Yeah.
Eventually, and sometimes it takes our own loved ones for us to see it, but eventually it comes back, and hopefully our country will see it. I think what Idaho did was rational and just and fair as far as equality of opportunity for competition. Yeah. That's why the Civil Rights Act was amended to provide for women's sports. And anything that disturbs that is a violation of civil rights and civil liberties.
And I think even a lot of people who disagree with what you're saying, they actually agree with it inside. It's just they can't say it out loud because they see it's a trap.
Right.
That it's going to make the rest of their arguments crumble. So they've got to take a ground on something that they know is absolutely silly.
Even some in the feminist movement, some feminist leaders, are outraged, and they've been basically kicked off the bus of the civil rights movement, and said no. Your rights are no longer valuable when it comes to transgender rights. Trump yours.
Yeah.
And you don't have that. So
and there's a big issue with being progressive and expansive in any kind of rights issues. At some point, you've expanded everything so much they collide, and a lot of great things were done in the women's rights movement in the 70s and 80s, and now those are being undermined by the fact that all a man has to do is say, "I'm female." And all that changes. Like the argument that women only make 70% as much money as men. Well, that's not true if you let each individual define who's male and who's female. You can play with those statistics all you want.
Right. And well, also if you break it down based on what actual occupations men have versus women, and a lot of that is academic choice and career choice.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Now, I want to talk about another situation dealing with the transgender movement, and that is a teacher that was fired for saying she to a biological girl who decided that she claimed that she felt like she was a boy, even though she was 100% biologically female.
Yeah.
The teacher accidentally used she instead of he, and was fired.
Yeah. There's so many issues that all come together in that one. Part of it is a tendency to view the government's role as being therapeutic. That I guess this becomes a big issue because this poor student was traumatized by not being respected for the fanciful imaginary self-identity. And that's just not the role of the state. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
You can't be firing people because they hurt someone's feelings through...
Honesty.
Yeah.
Basically, I know Christian teachers, we've had these cases at Pacific Justice where teachers have contacted us and said, they're wanting me to lie. And I said, look, I'll call them by their first name. I'm not going to use a pronoun that is wrong. It's a lie. I will not speak forth a lie and affirm a delusion that they have. And that's a very fair statement, and then they should be accommodated. But we have a case right now in dealing with Border Patrol, where a woman who's a Border Patrol agent, she's told that she has to be willing to dress and be naked and shower in front of a man, a biological man, because he says he feels like he's a female and he wants to use the female change room. They told this man who sees himself as a female that, we'll have a separate place for you to shower, to change. He says, no. I want to be with the other women. So that's what's happening. And so we filed a lawsuit. In fact, Michael Peffer's now taking this up. We filed this lawsuit. I think it's a very important case because, in my opinion, no individual should ever have to be naked on a daily basis in front of the opposite biological sex and be visually violated as a condition to work for the United States government.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about collapse.
Yeah.
If that becomes the predicate, if that becomes the way we function, I don't see much of a history for this nation to continue.
So the big picture issue in a lot of disputes over unequal treatment, these first became an issue because there were legal problems. We had laws that made it more difficult for women to work than for men. Once the legal part was changed, civil rights laws changed a lot of this, now it became a fight for dignity and respect. And there's not much the law can do in that area without it creating problems along the way. And that's why the state is sympathetic to the person who chooses their gender and others don't use the language that that person wants. Is this a battle for respect?
Now, I see in Massachusetts, a school district is now calling the police and child protective services against parents when they discover that the child did not show up for their Zoom call, for the classroom Zoom call. Police, CPS are being called in to come into families' houses, threatening to take kids from families. That's how CPS works. I know, I've dealt with them before. Is that a concern as we...
Yeah, and I think with time this is going to get more and more difficult, is the debate over who ultimately has responsibility for raising children, the family or the state. And for a long time, we family-oriented Christians were complicit in this because we thought the state reflects our values. Sending our kids off to be indoctrinated and trained by the state was the right thing to do. Now when you start having the state coming in saying, we don't like the way that you are suppressing our influence on your children, that's a big battle. It's going to get worse.
It is, and that's why I know we've been really committed to helping empower a lot of parents on not only going to private schools, but also to homeschool and to set up homeschool consortiums at their church, and how easy it is to provide a real alternative, even for families where both parents work. We're very excited about that, and we have this window that's opened up, and I'm just hoping and praying that the church will step up to take advantage of this opportunity. This is also played out as far as the attitude of education, the government schools in terms of the teacher.
That may be the single biggest issue that we face in the culture wars of the next 10 years, because if the state does not have the ability to indoctrinate children, it's lost one of its major institutions. Yeah. And if families have lost their ability to raise their children, they've lost a very significant part of life. This is going to be a big battle.
It's a huge battle because the stakes are very high on both sides.
And
is the government going to be able to, through their liberal institutions, teachers unions, going to be able to indoctrinate children away from the beliefs and values of parents, or will parents be able to raise up the children the way they should go? Wait, that's actually scriptural, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is scriptural.
So we are there in that battle already. Is the fierce battle to prohibit homeschooling is over that very issue. Is how can you instill all these radical viewpoints in children if the state doesn't have an opportunity to get access to them? So take away from the parents, let us indoctrinate them, send them back, and all is going to work as planned.
Yeah. So. And I understand that teachers are also complaining about parents being able to see what they're teaching their kids on Zoom. That parents can stand over here and actually look and see exactly what that teacher is teaching their children. And at least one teacher has come out and complained and says, no, I don't want parents to know what I'm telling their kids.
Yeah.
That was actually
that is so shocking. It is even more shocking that it hasn't shocked many people. Our culture is already complacent in that, and that is so wrong. But a teacher knows that he is teaching values that parents would object to. And his complaint is, I can't teach effectively if parents see what I'm telling their kids, because they don't want me teaching that.
Yeah.
And this is part of the collapse issue we talked about before, is that there's apathy about that. Why isn't there an uprising of the parents in that school district saying, we want to know what's being taught because we have a say in how our children are being educated.
Right.
So
Yeah, and and we also know, like, just another example of the objectionable material is the new sex ed curriculum.
Yeah.
It's very far left, radical, LGBTQ mindset, amoral, promoting bizarre sexual activities. It's now required from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade in the state of California. And we now also know that it's being adopted by 17, last I checked, 17 other major city school districts, including Fort Worth, Texas.
Wow.
It is sick, it's demented, and that's why we're going to be making available from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. A live streaming, 45-minute long video with a discussion afterwards, blowing the lid off this. And it's for mature audiences only. So parents, it's not for children, not even for teenagers or even college kids for that matter, as far as I'm concerned. But it's mature audience only, very explicit, the pictures, the diagrams. But it's something that parents need to know because this is coming to their kids all the way to kindergarten level, and it's every grade level has something to it. So the kid's going to get something in first grade, second grade, all the way to senior level in high school. And that's why I call this the great spiritual genocide of our children, because I don't see how a Christian kid can survive this if they're had this kind of massive anti-Christian, amoral indoctrination. And if people want to you want to watch this, you can register. You need to register beforehand on our website, pji.org. pji.org. You have to register ahead of time, and then get this out and encourage other people to watch it as well. But it's becoming that big of a problem. We had to do a film on this because it was so shocking. I said, let's blow the lid on this. Parents need to know, and we need to stop it in its tracks.
You're doing a very good thing there, because one thing I think we don't appreciate often enough is for all of us, the ways of organizing information, paradigms, we talk about them in the academic world. When you form those at the age of 6 or 7, they don't go away. And I saw a couple of years ago a program where a teacher had put on a bulletin board all the different sexes for second grade class, how to figure out the 8 different sexes that she was acknowledging were there. Even if, as a 8. Okay. Even as a 7-year-old, if you disagree with that, you've been exposed to it. And you will probably, for the rest of your life, when you hear the question, what sex are you, think, okay, I know there's 8. I only believe there are 2 of those, and I'm male. It's sad, but we are messing up the rationality of the way children think about sex long term by what we're doing in grade school. And the program that you're doing hits that straight on. So congratulations, you hit a home run on that one.
Yes, and I'm hoping massive numbers will see it, parents will see it, and then also pastors. Because I think when parents and pastors see this, and it's not, there's no hype to it. It's just the raw information we expose. This is the actual language. This is the actual diagram, the actual picture. When they see this, I hope they will then say, do we love kids? Do we love children? Do we love our children? Do we love the children in our church?
Yeah.
If we do, then let's start a church homeschool cooperative group in our church to enable every parent, whether they're working or not, to be able to work together cohesively to save these kids from what has now become a literal spiritual genocide. So that's all we can, we can hope and pray that happens. I want to touch on something else before the show's over, and that is dealing with Iowa State professor. This professor from Iowa State University came out and said that children will be dismissed from class if they write anything that is pro-life or anti the BLM organization, BLM.
Yeah.
If they express anything, any opinion like that, they'll be booted out of class.
Yeah.
And I contacted that university. Actually, my wife did, and said, I want to understand, is this true? Is this what was said? The university responded, to paraphrase for sake of time, said, yes, this is what the professor said. This goes against our university policy. We believe in First Amendment rights, yada, 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 yada. And this professor has been corrected. I thought, wait a minute. Corrected? Not fired? Not removed from her position? You still have someone with that kind of a bigoted, discriminated, anti-Christian mind resolve teaching children in a university, taxpayer funded?
Yeah.
And so I responded. I said, well, just so you know, I thank you for the information, but just so you know, I can assure you that my son and daughter will be removing Iowa State from any list of consideration for their further education, because it's a breach of trust to have that kind of a faculty member with that kind of resolve and animus and hatred towards people who have a biblical Christian worldview.
That professor is an extreme example who got busted because she was so explicit in her biases. But that is rampant across academia now. And there's a difference in college education now from just 10 years ago in that regard, that it is highly politicized. More academics think that their job is just to instill their viewpoint and perspective and sneer at those that disagree with them. And it's a toxic environment. And this is just one example. It's a very vivid example, but one example of that kind of horrific thing. I thought it was great that the university did stand up. I mean, this was a highly publicized issue, and I think the fact that it went viral embarrassed the university in taking a stance. But you're right what you pointed out. This is nothing compared to what would have happened if the issue was somebody who was strongly pro-family making that comment, that nothing, I will tolerate no assignments that question the nuclear family. That person would be fired.
Yeah, and parents need to speak up. When they see a university say this kind of stuff, they need to speak up and say, I just want you to know my child is no longer considering your university, attending university. This is not what we stand for. I know I went to Texas A&M undergrad, and there's going to be some Aggies out there who are not going to want to hear me to say this, but a female professor from the economics department came out from Texas A&M, came out and condemned one of the most respected economist, economic professors from the head of the University of Chicago economics department, just because she didn't like his conservative, more prudent perspective in assessing economic socialist priorities and social kind of worldviews.
Yeah.
I was stunned that Texas A&M would have that kind of a professor on staff, and I went and called him, and I said, I just want you to know, I'm an alumni. I'm removing Texas A&M from consideration for my daughter's university list of consideration, because I want her to go to a college university that believes in free thought and doesn't want university professors fired simply because they believe in fundamental economics and are not for socialistic big government worldviews. And you know, in all fairness, the administrator there said, I know exactly where you're coming from, and I can't blame you. And I won't say his name because he may get fired because of the changeover that's apparently taking place at Texas A&M with many of their faculty becoming liberal.
There is a lot going on that we don't acknowledge is out there, and it's a shame. I mean, in the sex education area, the radically libertarian sexual freedom crowd accomplished a unique trick in teaching things so outrageous that nobody believes they're actually teaching it. And they're getting away with this because when you see what's actually in their textbooks, people say, there is no way that's actually being taught, and yet it is.
Yeah, it is so way out. So I think, you know, parents, when they're looking at universities, are often looking at just the academics. Oh, Harvard, Yale, look at their academic standing. My child graduates from there. They're going to get a better job, making more money.
Yeah.
Or even some private colleges. We talked, unfortunately, about some terrible things we saw at Azusa Pacific, the firing of some, basically the Bible-believing professors and keeping on those that are not respectful of Scripture and be beholden to the LGBTQ movement. Parents need to wake up and realize that the cost is very high when it comes to their children and where they're going to spend the next 4 years of education.
Yeah. It can be better.
Yeah, it definitely can. It definitely can. And folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Let's continue the fight for your freedoms.